Bim bum, bim 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 bum, bim 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 bum, bim bum, bim 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 bum, bim 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 bum. Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat 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 shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat 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 shalom, Shabbat 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 shalom, Shabbat 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 shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Bim, bum, bim, 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 bum, bim, 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 bum, bim, bum, bim, 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 bum, bim, 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 bum. Hello and welcome to Hebrew Perspectives. Here we are, another Torah study. We go through the Bible and on a regular weekly schedule. If you look in the About section on the YouTube video, or if you follow along on Facebook, you will see what we do. On Facebook, it's posted every Sunday what the weekly readings are, and then throughout the week on Facebook, what the readings for each day. And then we throw in a little bit of a what the commandment is or commandments for that day as we roll through 613 commandments. And I find it interesting that a lot of them here lately, they actually coincide with what's going on with all of the sacrifices in Leviticus and all of that we've been working on. And so it's funny how those things happen. You know, I say funny, but really what it is, everything was by design, by God, by design. And when we stray out of that and do our own thing, that's when we start running into trouble. Well, before I start in too much of that, let's start with well, today we're talking. It's the Torah portion this week is Shemini. For those of you who are new, Torah means instruction. That's the Hebrew word for instruction. It is the first 5 books of the Bible. So in some, it's actually also known, the first 5 books of the Bible are known as the Law of Moses. So it's kind of confusing when people say, well, the Law of Moses has been done away with. So if we start thinking critically a little bit and start thinking logically, it's like, wait a minute. So you're saying that Genesis is no longer in effect? Exodus is no longer in effect? You can see when you start actually asking questions and thinking critically that you think about a lot of what is being propagated out there today, which is all over the place. You soon realize that, you know, hey, you have to ask the questions. And then, of course, sometimes when you ask these questions of people, they get uncomfortable. But that's normal. That's normal because you're going into their paradigm, into something they deeply invested into their lives. You know, I thought the same way and studied the same way for years and years, but then I allowed wisdom to affect what I was doing. And what is the definition of wisdom in Hebrew? It's kind of like an open hand. You're receiving something. Wisdom is receiving something. So today we hope to receive something from God, and we're going to talk about the order of holiness, and we're also going to talk about loving your neighbor. But before we begin with that, we're going to say the Torah blessing. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us to immerse ourselves in the words of Torah. Please, Lord our God, sweeten the words of Torah in our mouth and in the mouth of your people, the family of Israel. May we and our offspring and the offspring of your people, the house of Israel, all of us, know your name and study your Torah for its own sake. Blessed are you, Lord, who teaches Torah to his people Israel. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who selected us from all the peoples and gave us his Torah. Blessed are you, Lord, giver of the Torah. And as the Torah blessing says, may Torah always be sweet to you. All right, so let's get at it. Now, the first thing that I want to do is I want to share with you today we read every morning, my wife and I, we read from a book called Living Each Day by Rabbi Abraham Twersky. Rabbi Abraham Twersky was a psychologist, psychiatrist, um, and he dealt with a lot of people with addictions, especially alcohol. And so he helped people with that. And as a matter of fact, when you read through it, you'll see that it actually follows the weekly readings and actually each reading of each day. Now, this one may be a little bit off because of the extra month that we had this year, but still, it's amazing how even those things fit with what's going on. Now, all right. So the first part, and I'm just kind of describe here. So the first part is he does two parts each day. One of them has to do with um, the prayers that are prayed on a regular basis. So he takes a prayer and he breaks it down and he talks about it and he uses insights from other rabbis and things like that. And then the second part um, comes from the sages. Oftentimes it is sometimes it's a scripture, sometimes it's something from out of the Talmud, and then he explains that. So let's get to it. Sanctify your name upon those who hallow you, and sanctify your name in your world. Rabbi Yerucham Levovitz notes that on various occasions the Talmud refers to the person who lives according to the dictates of God as one who is a partner in creation of the world. This is from the Talmud from Shabbat 10a. A partner, says Rabbi Yeruchim, is not an employee, but rather an owner. A partner has a right to express an opinion on the operation of a business. And whereas his opinion may be overruled, he is not like a hired worker who cannot insist on his opinion being heard. Rabbi Yerucham states that the reason the great Tzaddikim, this is the righteous ones, that's Hebrew for righteous ones, were able to make things happen with their prayers was because they had achieved a status of being partners with God in the operation of the world. As partners, they had an authoritative position. In those instances where we find the prophets to have taken issue with God, it is because they felt that they had an owner's share in the world and had a right to express their opinion. Ooh, how interesting is this, right? Now, he continues on. He says, if we think our prayers are not effective enough, perhaps we should think of doing those things that will bestow upon us a status of partnership. This is not an easy achievement, and the responsibility is awesome. And this is where I'll stop right here. And this is the problem with the majority of people that believe in God and believe in the Messiah today is that they want the bennies, but they don't want the responsibility. So this is where, boom, a lot of people's ears just went off. Done. Hey, I'm just gonna love my neighbor and love God. Yay! And that's all and good, but you still have to do more than that. All right. So he says it's not an easy achievement, and the responsibility is awesome. But we are then in a position to not only pray, but actually demand of God that he reveal his glory in the world and openly sanctify his name so that all living things can see his majesty. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of what was just said here. There is people are always wondering, why aren't there any miracles? Why aren't there more healings? Why are there so many people why are people so in trouble in the world nowadays? Why is there so much trouble and all this? But again, this is just one of those things that if we go beyond just loving our neighbor, when we go beyond just loving God and we look to do this to be partners with God in creation, wow, then we can start seeing his glory revealed. Then we can start saying, Lord, what about this? Your word says this. Let's do this, Lord. Let's reveal your name to everyone. Let's bring your glory out so that all can see and there will be no doubt. Now, from the sages, he says, when a person insults someone else, it is his own defects that he is revealing. This comes from Kiddushin 70a. All right. So This is one of those things, and we are very, very critical people. And again, we love to think of the negative,
Right.
and that's the human nature in us. But that's something that we can solve. All right. So Rabbi Meir Malbim had some bitter enemies in his community. On Purim, when it was customary to send the rabbi a gift, one of his adversaries sent him a pig. Now, I'm going to stop and pause right there, and I'm going to let you know something. This fits with what we're going to be talking about today. And it talks about, later on, we'll talk about kosher eating. Now, here we just read that his adversary sent him a pig. Now, it's interesting that when you look at Israel historically, every time it was captured, one of the things that they would do is they would go into the temple and they would slaughter a pig on it,
Yep.
just as a slap in the face to God. All right. Now we have to remember that the Jewish people have been all over the world, and this is one of the things that stands out. What do you mean you don't eat bacon? All right. Before we get into too much of this, I just wanted to bring that out. Okay. It's always a slap in the face with the pig. It just happens that way. Now, Rabbi Meir responded by sending the man a photograph of himself with a note that read, "I received your gift. Since you chose to send me a likeness of yourself, I am returning the favor and sending a likeness of myself." Now, that's funny. Remember, he sent him a pig. All right. Now, that's funny. When overcome by anger, a person may berate someone thinking that he will thereby punish the other person by insulting him. The Talmud cautions us that not only is this a juvenile character defect, but it is also self-defeating. People do not respect anyone who insults, even if there were justifications for resentment. I'll tell you right now, I would have been tempted to do something like that too.
Mhm.
It wasn't necessarily right. It's funny.
Human character.
It's response for response. You want an equal and opposite reaction or whatever it's called.
Right.
So he finishes off saying, proper character development requires learning how to overcome resentments and handling personal insults gracefully. Now, I would recommend that you get this book. It's kind of hard to see here, but it's called Living Each Day. But this is what it looks like. Rabbi Abraham Twersky.
Yeah,
It's a very, very good book to have. It's very, very good.
Yeah.
Now, so parasha Shemini. Parasha Shemini, it means eighth or eight. In Leviticus chapter 9 and verse number 1, it says, "And on the eighth day, Moses summoned Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel." So remember that there's something interesting happening here. We had the 7 days of inauguration, and then all of a sudden the parasha cuts off. You would think that this would be in the previous. You think this would be in last week's Torah portion of Tzav, but it's a new beginning. 8 is the number of new beginnings. 8 is this number that's out in this quantum realm. 8 is you start doing a study of 8 and you'll start seeing some amazing things. King David was the 8th son. Um, uh, the Shemini Atzeret and Simchat Torah, they come on the 8th day after the 7 days of Sukkot, which again, that's the end of the festivals. And then boom, new beginning. We begin our reading cycle over again. So new beginnings. So you do a study of 8 and you'll find a lot of very interesting things. Now, in the book, in Me'am Loez, in the Torah anthology, we can go to the second verse, and we'll do a little reading here, and we'll look at it a little bit of insight. It says, he said to Aaron, "Take for yourself a young bull for a sin offering and a ram for an elevation offering, unblemished, and offer them before Hashem." Now, for those of you who knew, Hashem means the name. basically the ineffable name of God, one that we do not pronounce. All right, so take yourself a calf for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering, both unblemished, and sacrifice them before God. Now, Moses said to Aaron, take for you. In other words, Moses was saying, take, this is for your own benefit, right? Aaron was to take a calf as a sin offering. And Ma'am Luez says that this was so that the Satan, cursed be he, would not denounce Aaron and say, because of the calf that he made at Horeb, the Israelites sinned. Now, Horeb, or Horeb in English, is also Mount Sinai. There's two very low mountain peaks there, and one is Sinai and one is Horeb, but it's always referred to as Sinai, but every once in a while it's referred to as Horeb. But it's the same mountain range. And it's interesting that is because of basically what this is talking about is talking about the calf that Aaron made that when they sinned with the golden calf incident. And so here now, Aaron is taking for himself a calf, and he's being commanded by God to do so. Aaron was also to take a ram. This was so that Aaron would receive the merit of Abraham's deed of binding his son Isaac like a ram to a sacrifice as a burnt offering. So every year on Yom Kippur, which in coming we'll be talking more about that, but every year during Yom Kippur, even to this day, forgiveness is asked for in the merit of Isaac, of the sacrifice. And remember, Isaac was a willing sacrifice. He was the image of his father. He looked exactly like his father. He was Abraham's only begotten son. You see where I'm going with this? All right. And so that is why today, the Messiah, Yeshua, he is our atonement. We do things in his merit. That's so you see that, and he was a willing sacrifice. All right. Now, and it says here, both of these animals were to be perfect without blemish. They would then be offered before God. Verse number 3. Speak to the Israelites and tell them to take unblemished animals, a goat for a sin offering, a yearling calf, and a lamb for a burnt offering. They were to take male goats because the Satan is likened to a goat. Yeah, you've seen the pictures? Yeah, you've probably seen those at some point in your life, made to look like a goat. And this was very common during that time. You see, the Satan, cursed be he wants to rule the world.
Right.
And it's happening all around us. And part of the difficulty is, just like with what Rabbi Abraham Twersky talks about, because of the alcoholism, is getting people to admit that they have a problem. There are so many believers that don't believe that there's a problem with what they're doing.
Right.
All right. So the first step is to admit, pardon me. I hope that wasn't too grating on the sound. And so, okay, so then it continues on and says, this was so that the Satan would not denounce them because of the kid which Jacob's sons slaughtered, dipping Joseph's coat in its blood, back in Genesis 37:31. This was to be a sin offering. Wow. So you see how these things kind of connect? And then God has a purpose in everything that he's doing. This is why we pay so much attention to the detail. This is why we look at the Hebrew for a lot of things. Did you know that there are a lot of things that are in Hebrew? I have a Mach Zor here somewhere that is during Yom Kippur is used. I don't see it. It's not within my reach. It doesn't matter. But the point is that there is a prayer that is said during Yom Kippur. And what's interesting is that prayer was written by Peter the Apostle, and it's still used every year on Yom Kippur. Isn't that amazing? It's one of the few instances where you have, so like Peter and James, they are mentioned in the Talmud. I bet you, did you know that?
Yeshua was too.
And Yeshua all over the place, of course. But then you have, so I mean, James or Yaakov in Hebrew, that's what his Hebrew name was, would be, he was called Yaakov the Zadok, or Yaakov Hasadik, the righteous. Yeah, in the Talmud, he was called righteous. He was called a Zadok. That's a righteous one. That is an important thing in Judaism, and is written in the Talmud. And then you have Peter, who had it was the same kind of recognition. They were respected by the Pharisees of that day.
Yes.
Strangely and oddly enough, Paul's not anywhere in the Talmud. So, but anyway, they were also to take a calf because they had sinned with a calf. In addition, they were to take a yearling sheep. This was to recall the merit of Isaac, who was bound like a sheep. Again, there's that reference. So it's for the priesthood and the people, right? One might raise an objection here, and when you read the Talmud, you'll see objections going back and forth, and then you'll see that there is a lot of times it's resolved, and sometimes it's not resolved, and it's tabled for the sake of the Torah and for the sake of heaven. But so God commanded that 2 calves be brought as sacrifices, one by Aaron and one by the Israelites. Both of these were brought because of the sin of the golden calf. Why did God command that Aaron's calf be offered as a sin offering and the Israelites' calf as a burnt offering? The answer is that the burnt offering atones for sinful thoughts, while the sin offering atones for the actual sin. Oh, kind of interesting, isn't that? This is another one of those thoughts that's very pharisaical in thought. So when the Messiah says, it's adultery is wrong, but it's even if you think about it,
Right.
for the thoughts. Remember, that's what a lot of the offerings were for. People were having trouble with their thoughts. Why were they having trouble with their thoughts? Well, we can talk about that a little bit more. Don't let me forget. But we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to kosher eating, because believe it or not, it's related to kosher eating.
Wow.
All right. So therefore, God commanded Aaron to bring a calf as a sin offering. It is obvious that Aaron did not sin with any idolatrous thoughts when he made the calf. This was discussed at length in parasha Kitisa. Aaron's motives and thoughts were for the sake of heaven. He was a peacemaker. And this is another reason why Aaron was chosen to be the priesthood, even though it looked like he fell so hard. Like he made a grave mistake. And sometimes the people that make the gravest mistakes make the best leaders. And that's what God looked at Aaron, and that's what he was seeing.
Yes.
Is that Aaron, he truly had a heart that was for the people.
Right.
Now, Aaron's motives and thoughts were for the sake of heaven. Although he made the calf for the sake of heaven, he was punished for the deed, since it caused the Israelites actually to commit a sin. This is why God commanded Aaron to bring a sin offering. This is another one of those things. Sometimes some of the things that we do cause other people to sin. We have to be careful about what we're doing. The Israelites, however, sinned in thought. Therefore, God told them to bring a calf as a burnt offering. This was to atone for their evil, idolatrous thought. All right. Like I said, so Aaron was the most fitting because, think about it. Who is probably one of the greatest leaders that we read about in the Bible? And that would be King David, right? He failed miserably. but rose to be one of the most famous king in all of Israel. You know, even the first Jew, Abraham, he made mistakes. Rabbi Monk. Now I'm going to the call of the Torah with Rabbi Monk. All right, so the 8th day we're talking here. So, all right, so this is some more interesting things about going back to the 8th day. So, Rabbi Monk says here, he says, when the 7 days passed without incident, Moses awaited the 8th day in trepidation. Now, this is kind of interesting because here you have all the joy and the pomp and the circumstance of everything that was happening. And then you had Nadav and Abihu bring strange fire or alien fire. And then right after that, God instructs the priesthood, especially the high priest, to remain from drinking alcohol before going. So when you critically think and you add up things as the progression of how things are happening, you'll notice that the rabbis come to the conclusion that Nadav and Abihu must have been drunk. What were they? They may have also just been, because wine gladdens the heart, of course, but overindulgence. This is one of those things where you can go too far with your joy in living for God. I know that seems strange, but you can get off balance. Let's say it like that. We basically, that's what we're always looking for. We're always looking for that balance. Some of you are just now joining us. Thank you for coming in. But so that balance is what we're looking at for in life. And so this is why Moses, we get to this point, there's some trepidation, because for the first 7 days, basically Aaron and his sons weren't involved in what was going on. Moses was doing all. And now all of a sudden Moses, he's going to turn this over, and he's happy about it, but yet he has that trepidation. It's kind of like if you've ever been in a position of authority and you're assigning somebody to do something that's super, super important. Of course, you're going to look for somebody who's trusted. And of course, Moses trusted his brother Aaron. Of course he did. But that still doesn't mean, when it comes to something important, that you almost get this feeling, it's like, I should take care of it myself. But that's not always the right thing to do. It's not always the right thing. Sometimes it is. Sometimes you have to step in. That's when I was growing up, I pretended I didn't know how to do the dishes. You know how many times my mom showed me how to do the dishes all the way until she was done before I learned how to do the dishes. You might say I was a little bit of a con man, but anyway, so it was the day on which Aaron and his sons were to begin their duties. The sages of the Midrash depict the contrast between the two brothers in the words of Ecclesiastes 8:5. The one who performs the mitzvah, that's the commandment, Aaron, is not conscious of any harm, but the heart of the wise man, speaking of Moses, knows that the time of judgment is at hand. So this is a serious time. It's just a very serious time. I had some conversation with somebody this week, and it was just, this seems so archaic to so many people. But it not only does it have some deep spiritual meaning to a lot of it, but it was what God commanded. And you did not want to disappoint God.
That's good.
You wanted to follow the commandment. So in that atmosphere of mingled anguish and sacred joy, the 8th day began for Moses. The Torah denotes these mixed feelings by starting the chapter with the word "it was." That's vayahi. which the Midrash tells us is always an indication of troubled joy, or a harbinger of distress. In this context, the Midrash refers to the words of the psalmist, I say to the joyful, and an end to rejoicing, Psalm 75:5. And so the Midrash makes the bitter observation so often illustrated in the Torah that the righteous are not permitted to savor for long their happiness here on earth. Examples of this, you can go back to Genesis chapter 34:1. Now, everyone, a lot of times we don't think about certain things. I think we just celebrated, what was it last month was Women's Month. But the wife of Aaron was Elisheva. She was the daughter of Aminadab. That's back in Exodus 6:23. Exodus 6:23 is an example, I should say, a classic example of what I've just talked about here. The Midrash says, no woman had so much joy from her family as did Aaron's wife. Her husband was a prophet and a Kohen Gadol, or a high priest. Her brother-in-law, Moses, was the leader of the people and a prophet of God. He was both a king and a priest as well. Her sons were the young Kohanim of the divine service, and her brother Nachshon was the first among the heads of the tribes of the 12 tribes. So you can see she had a lot to be proud of. It bring much joy and pride in life. But last, her joy did not last. 2 of her sons went off to offer their sacrifice on that very day. They perished before God. This comes from Midrash Tanhuma. Now, here's where some things get interesting. Rabbi Hirsch, he has a discussion about circumcision. Again, there is an 8th day. Circumcision for a young Jewish boy happens on the 8th day. Rabbi Hirsch declares that the 8th day following the period of 7 days has a special significance. In view, the number 6 represents the limited material and physical element in creation, whereas the number 7 designates the creative freedom of the spiritual element which dominates nature. The concept of combining the physical and spiritual in a harmonious relationship is represented by the number 8. This is the ideal of Judaism. In our present context, the 7-day period during which the Kohanim remained at the entrance of the sanctuary ended a phase of their lives. Starting with the 8th day, they ceased to be private individuals. They had reached a higher level of existence, which implied a consecration to God and his people. That is the day on which the Shekinah was to appear. Wow. Now think about that. We have the patterns we see there. We see circumcision. We see that's the dedication. That's coming into covenant with God. Then you have the 6 days of the material of the world, so to speak, and then you have the 7th day, which is that spiritual time where many people see a Shabbat as being something restrictive, but it's actually freedom. Oh, there's so much freedom and joy to when you observe Shabbat. It changes your life. And that's one of the things that it's interesting. So if you go to a website like Chabad, you'll find that there is a lot of instruction on how to do things. They're trying to help other Jews learn how to do things. Why? Because there are so many people that are not observant. Now, what you may not know is that it's not for Gentiles. They don't put it on there for Gentiles. They put it on there for unobservant Jews. And why they're doing this is that they want someone to maybe begin to observe Shabbat. Because when they do that, the blessings begin to flow.
Right.
And when you do a mitzvah, which means to connect with God, it leads to another mitzvah.
Yes, it does. Amen.
When a woman lights the candle on Friday nights and says the blessing, it's a blessing, and the blessings flow. When you change how you eat, to say maybe the next step is to start eating kosher, and all of that is involved in that, believe it or not, the blessing comes. I haven't given a whole lot of details on this, but hopefully today we'll do a little bit more. 35 minutes we're into this. We're doing great. I always say that, and then the next thing I looked up and it's time to be done. So you see here we have some. This is basically what happens here. Is so we get called to this point where we come to a realization. We become believers, saved, as many people call it, and we're turning our lives over to God. And what happens is now we are like that kingdom of priests. And that's what Exodus 19:6, I'll make you into a kingdom of priests.
Right.
And the Apostle Peter talks about it later. He quotes that. It's mentioned in Isaiah, and in another place where we're priests.
Right.
This is what we're doing. And what does that do? Well, it's a higher level of existence. Again, like what we were talking about at the beginning, this is bringing us to a place where we're going beyond just loving your neighbor.
Right.
We're going beyond that. We're digging into the Torah because that's what helps us to see, and we work on our midot, our character traits, and to improve. And then what that does is that we are consecrating ourselves to God. And then when we're doing that, we are held to a higher standard, so to speak. Again, that's that great responsibility that so many people don't want to have. But when we're doing this, guess what? The Shekinah appears. The Holy Spirit comes into our lives.
That's right.
All right. Now, let me get to Patuke Chotam. Now, Patuke Chotam has some interesting things. So now, let's jump to chapter 10 and verse number 16. Moshe inquired insistently about the goat of the sin offering, for behold, it had been burned. 10 and 16. The Hida mentions Nachal Kadumim, that the words Darash, inquires means inquired. That word Darash may sound familiar. That's we give a sermon or a drash, a word of God, so to speak. That's where that comes from. It's amazing. This is another one of these reasons why you learn Hebrew, because there's just so much to Hebrew words that if you just look at things on the surface, you don't see all of it. So let me go on. So the first word, Darash, ends one line, while the second word, Darash, begins the next line. You'll find this also throughout Hebrew. When you study the Hebrew language, you'll find that a lot of words stop in the middle of a word. It stops and then starts again. That's one of those things. And then you'll find out the scribes, when they were writing this out, in order to save space, they do little markings that I don't know why it's escaping me right now what that's called. Forgive me. Some of you probably might even know if you're Hebrew. But basically, it's showing that it's a double letter in that spot. But they put one letter and then that little, is it a dagash? No. What is it? Anyway. But the point is that they were doing it to save space. But it's the end of something and the beginning of another, but it's right in the middle of a word. And so that you know that there's a pause there as well. So in other words, Yaakov. All right. So that's an example. Let's see here. Okay, he quotes others and also offers his own opinion regarding the significance of this. If I may, this is Patuke Chotam saying, I would like to add my own poor opinion regarding the matter. As the Mishnah says, if a person fulfills the Torah despite poverty, he will ultimately fulfill it in wealth. Well, that perked a few of you up, didn't it? Yeah, that comes from the Mishnah in Avot 4:11. That's the sayings of the fathers 4:11, and this is alluded to in our verse as follows: the first word, darash or inquire, written at the end of the line, represents a poor man who has reached the very end of the line. Oh, I like what Patuke Hotam is doing here. I like that. I like that. Despite his poverty, he inquires about the Torah. He learns it, fulfills its mitzvot, and does not neglect them. See, now, we've talked about this before in the past. What is the biggest thing that the enemy tries to keep people from? That's education.
Right, that's true.
This is why education is so important. And you keep the poor man down, you keep him from being educated, and then he can never grow. Right. Now, consequently, even if he becomes wealthy and find himself at the head of the line as a leader to others due to his status, he will still continue to inquire about the Torah and learn it, represented by the second word, darash, at the head of the line, for he has remained faithful to the Torah and the mitzvot even amid poverty. So do it consistently. Right. I really want to jump ahead to Matthew 5. Yeshua talking about being poor in spirit. Again, Matthew, the book. Look at. I want to show you something. I think I've showed you this book, but this book here is just it's Strachan Billerbeck's commentary, and on the Talmud and the Midrash. Now, what you'll see here is, oh my goodness, look how thick this book is. This is just the book of Matthew, of the many different Talmudic references. And you can't tell me that the Messiah wasn't bringing out the Talmud. Matthew is the most Jewish book. Many people think it's John. And then I have the second book in the second volume. Let's see here, the second volume. The second volume, it's not as thick, but it's the rest. It's the rest of the Gospels, and I think it's the book of Acts too. So that's quite interesting. All right, I know that was a little bit of a detour there. Alternatively, we could explain as follows: our sages say the Torah does not endure except within a person who is lowly of spirit. Oh my goodness! What, poor of spirit? What are we doing here? That comes from Ta'anit 7a. Therefore, the Torah is compared to water that flows only downward to a low place and does not rise to a high place. Wow. And throughout Talmudic literature, the water in a mikveh is known as living water. Right. And the Holy Spirit, the Shekinah, is also known as living water. And then you read in John chapter 7, the Messiah, out of your belly shall flow rivers of living water. He knew what he was doing. The poor among you always, but what kind of poor? Right. Wow. Now, the letters Resh and Shin in the first word of darash, written at the end of the line, are vocalized with a cholam. They are pronounced as Rosh. So you could say, it's Rosh, as in head. So the word darash, which is inquire, the last two letters, it would have the Rosh as in a head. So that's how you spell it. So the letters Resh and Shin in the second word darash, written at the beginning of the line, are vocalized with a patach. They are pronounced as Rash, which is poor. Interesting. So Patuke Chotam goes on and he implies this. He says, if a person acts with humility, like the word darosh, which is at the end of the line, the Torah will endure within him and he will ultimately become a rosh, a head, a leading Torah scholar. Wow. So someone who is poor in spirit could end up being a leading Torah scholar. Isn't that amazing? However, if a person is haughty and places himself at the head of the line, like the word darash, written at the beginning of the line, he will ultimately become rosh, impoverished and devoid of Torah. The Torah will not endure within him. Kind of interesting how basically, remember the incident where the mother came and said to the Messiah, can you put my one son on one side and the other son on the other side? Trying to basically put a couple of boys ahead of the line, at the head of the line. Wasn't the right way to do it. Now, them being poor, of course, studying Torah later on, they become Torah scholars because they did it the right way.
That's right.
They follow the right way. All right. Alternatively, we could explain as follows. As we know, the beginning of Shara Ruach HaKodesh and Sha'ar HaGilgulim, the Torah contains 4 levels of understanding. And we've talked about these before, but I'm going to cover them again just so you have an understanding. Peshat, which is the surface level. I'll just read this so we can understand. So you have the Peshat, Remez, Darush, Sod, you have the simple understanding, you have the hints and allusions, you have expounding upon the deeper meaning of the verse, that's the Darush, and the mystical secrets, that's the Sod level. These are known by the acronym Pardes, which means orchard. I have a book called by Rabbi Trugman called Orchard of Delights. In other words, so he digs in deeper. So that's my timer telling me I should be done. Now, a man is obligated to study all these levels of meaning. Again, so many people are stuck on the Peshat level. They're just reading what they see on the surface, and some may dig a little bit deeper, but not much really going on there. So the lowest level is Peshat, the simple understanding. The next is Remez, hints and allusions. Right, the Yeshua did that. He did that a lot. This is how much he did it. Remember how thick this book is? That's how much he did it. That's just in Matthew, right? So beyond that is Darush, expounding the highest level is Sod, mystical secrets. Now the word Darash, inquire, is an acronym for Darush, Remez, Sod. Oh, now I know this is getting kind of deep. Stay with me. But the letters Samik and Sheen are interchangeable since they are produced from the same part of the mouth. We can now understand this verse as follows, Petuke Hotam says. The first word, Darash, inquire, written at the end of the line represents Peshat, the surface level, the lowest level of Pardes. The verse implies if you have only learned Peshat, the lowest level of all, you have not fulfilled your obligation. Rather, you must also be careful to learn the 3 levels above it and superior to it, referring to the word Darash, inquire, written at the head of the line, which is an acronym for the higher levels, Darush, Remez, Sod. Alternatively, so we can read this, pardon me, the Jerusalem Talmud says in Peah 2:4, it says that all the Torah insights ever to be conceived from the day the Torah was given until the end of time were revealed to Moshe. This is how we know that the oral Torah is legit, because God gave him the written Torah, and then he explained all the details, and Moses passed those along. So, thus the word Darash, inquire, at the end of the line alludes to the end of all generations. In other words, it alludes to all the Torah insights that will ever be conceived by all the Torah scholars until the end of time. They were already revealed to Moshe, but was at the very beginning when the Torah was given. alluded to by the word darash, inquire, that appears at the beginning of the line. So we see here that there are many insights for us to find. Many insights for us to find. Now, I've run out of time, and it just goes to show you, we can't even get into this book today, Matthew chapter 5. But we did kind of cover that. Messiah talks about being poor in spirit.
Right.
All right, and we brought out some Talmudic references, so you did see that. And then we also have, we have the Hebrew gospel. If you don't have the Hebrew gospels, it's a good to pick that up too. It's I'll tell you though, it's not cheap. But that's really all we have for you today, and I'm so glad that you did come and join in with us. Remember to like and share these videos. Help us to grow.
Yes.
And we don't have a real big viewership, so to speak. The videos do get watched. I do go occasionally back and look and see how many times a video has been looked at. And thankfully, we're not in that realm of people on YouTube that nobody watches anything that they do. But we're thankful that we do have a little bit of a following, and we're so grateful and thankful for all of you. And so help us to grow, like and share, subscribe if you're new to us on YouTube, like us on Facebook. That's what we like to see.
Yes.
So, pardon me again. May the Lord bless you and keep you, guard you, and may the Lord shine his countenance upon you and be gracious to you, and may God turn his countenance toward you and grant you peace. Bim, bum, bim, 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 bum, bim, 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 bum, bim, bum, bim, 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 bum, bim, 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 bum. Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat.